Buyers, when you're looking for a home, you're focusing on the wrong things. You're focusing on the small ticket items instead of the big ticket items. And today we're going to go over, as a buyer, what you should be focusing on and what you can easily change out.
Yeah, we see buyers today stressing over the wrong things. So when I'm out showing buyer property and they're focusing on completely the wrong things that honestly, at the end of the day, they really don't matter. It's things that can easily be changed when you should be looking at, the nuts and bolts or the sticks and bricks of the actual construction and all of these other things, which we're going to unpack today.
Yeah, it's so funny, when we walk into a flip, like some of these flips are just, they're so crumbly constructed, or they didn't touch the roof and it's all just like countertops and flooring. And my buyer, I love this one. I love it. And I'm like, yeah, but like the water heater's old, and not every flip is like this. Some flips do a great job, but some flips do an awful job. And people are so
Yeah.
distracted by like what's new that they look over what is actually there.
Yeah, it's kind of like the bright, shiny object syndrome where it's like, I love those counters. I love that flooring. Okay, let's back it up. The location is crap. The AC and the furnace are crap. The shingles are old. Like it looks nice, at the front get go, but it's not. It's like, okay, these are all things you could do to another house that has better bones. If
Cheaply.
everything like the mechanicals, yes, cheaply. If the mechanicals and all of the main things are done or newer, you can put in flooring for a couple bucks a square foot. You can update, countertops depending on what you get for relatively inexpensive when you're comparing that to the purchase price of a home.
Oh my gosh, it's so crazy. Like I just did a flip on one of my condos and I was shocked at how cheap it was to, make it go from like a D to like a B plus, And I could have got it all the way to an A. It just would have cost me a little more money, but it's really so cheap. Like 15 grand, So in the scheme
Yeah.
of, and that's for a condo, but in the scheme of things, like it's really not expensive to do a lot of these things. It's not expensive to paint cabinets. It's not expensive to put in countertops. The granite's expensive if you want to do that, but there's cheaper products out there that look, similar to granite. To paint is
Yep.
really cheap. There's all these things. And I always, when I'm walking around with buyers, I'm trying to like make them see it. Like, okay, I want you to take out this old crummy furniture that this person list, has. I want you to
Yeah.
imagine that these yellow walls are bright white, and then whatever flooring you want is in there. And it's so hard for them to do. It's so for the
Yeah.
average buyer, it's so hard for them to do.
Yeah, it is. And like those are all things that can easily be changed where we go back to what's the primary thing you hear in real estate? Location, location, location. That is something that you cannot change. So do not sacrifice on location. That is one of the top 5 things that actually super extremely matters, like more than I can stress.
More than anything, whenever somebody picks a location, like they want a bigger house or a nicer house, so they decide that they're going to live further outside the city center, or they're going to go into a crummier part of town to be able to afford this. I can tell you within a couple years, they're always telling me, I wish I would have bought elsewhere. I wish, or they're listing that house that they just bought, losing money on it, and then, moving to where they wanted to be. Because at the end of the day, if you have kids, you want to be them to be in a safe area. You want them to be in good schools. If you're a single person, you want to be close to your work, close to highway access. Whatever you want, though, everyone's different, but whatever you want, when you start sacrificing things and you're going way out of town to get a nicer house. I remember I had a friend, she's like, well, if I go all the way down to Queen Creek, I can get a really nice house, which in Arizona is kind of pretty far. It's like hour and a half. And I said,
Yeah.
yeah, and she goes, "And that way I can host dinner parties." And I said, "But who's coming to those?" You know what I mean? Like all
Yeah.
your friends are an hour and a half away. Now, if you say, "I'm gonna move, I'm gonna build my whole community down there, my kids are gonna go to school down there, we're just gonna live down there and make a life down there," that's different. But if you're the type of person that you're not used to living far outside the city, you're used to, going to this restaurant and going to this doctor and going to the, you're going
Mhm.
to hate living out there because everything's going to be over an hour drive, and you're not going to
Yep.
care that you have this big, beautiful home that you could afford.
Yeah. It's just so true. And like a couple of things that you mentioned, I think are different in my market. You know, you're looking at proximity to schools and amenities, and we're looking at proximity to grocery stores, hospitals. Like those are real life conversations,
Mhm.
which, you know, are different in rural communities, but the end goal is still the same. Pick a location because you can't change it. Is that, you know, 30-minute commute going to wear on you? Do you really want a 30-minute commute? You know, those are things that people really need to think about before they try to buy a nicer home further away. And then, like you said, their friends don't come to dinner parties because it's such a far commute.
Well, and two, you have to look at your savings. So, okay, so let's say, it's a $50,000 difference for you to be where you want to be versus, far out.
Yeah.
$50,000 is a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but it's probably $300 a month on your mortgage payment. That's not nothing either, but how much gas and time are you sacrificing to live that far out? Now, if you work from home and you don't do a lot and you'll probably drive, that commute a couple times a month, it could totally be worth it. But if you're somebody
Yeah.
that, instead of a 15-minute commute, you have a 45-minute commute to and from work every day, and maybe you and your partner do, well, that $300 that you're saving in gas, you're not really saving it. And in time, so you kind of have to look at that stuff and say, okay, Danielle, this is 50,000 more dollars. Yes, don't get too hung up on the purchase price though when it comes to, the difference, because you really have to break it down
Yeah.
monthly, because you're spending that money somewhere. And I don't know about you, but if I'm driving an extra half an hour to work each way every day, that $300 is worth, my time's worth that $300 a month.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And time goes it's such a factor cuz you just waste so much time. But the other thing that I wanted to mention aside from the location is the layout of a home or the functionality of a home. That's not something that you can change cheaply. Flooring, carpet, paint, all things that are easy, but if the layout sucks, if people don't want to live there or if you're kind of limited on who the next buyer would be, you can't change that.
Yeah. It's really important. It's funny. Sometimes I take buyers through and they're like, yeah, so like I like this. I think I just open it up and take out this wall. And these are the same buyers now that we're like looking in Timbuktu because they don't want to spend 50 more grand to be in the location that they want. I'm like, how much do you think? I mean, like when you start taking out walls and you start, doing that kind of work, like that's expensive work, right? Like it's not
Yeah.
these little cosmetic minor things, or people say, I was touring with someone yesterday and they wanted to add a walk-in closet. And they're like, well, we can just take out the side of the house and add a walk-in closet over here. It's like, so you're going to go through the whole framing of the house and add in a closet? Like that is very expensive. And there's all the, you're going to have to get all these permits and all,
Yeah.
so people underestimate how expensive some of this stuff is. And that's why, if you want like an open kitchen concept is very popular. So if you walk into a house and it has a closed kitchen concept, to open that up, that's expensive. That's really expensive. You're taking out cabinets, you're taking out walls, you're cutting into things like,
Yeah.
that now, if the kitchen's already open, it's just super dated. Well, that's cheap and easy. But this to try to open it up and actually change the layout, man, that's, and people get distracted though. You've seen it. Like they love that it's
Yep.
updated. They love the cabinets are done. They love the flooring's done. They almost don't even think about the layout.
Yeah, for sure. And when you're removing walls and things like that, yes, you can have a vision, but then that's going to require usually plumbing changes if you're changing a layout, electrical, like electricians and re-inspections, and then not to mention like drywall and ceiling texture. And you open up a whole can of worms that can snowball out of hand very, very quickly. So, you know, it's just some things to keep in mind that it's easy, you know, to say, oh, we could change that. Well, it's like, yeah, you could, but you're going to be adding zeros on these expenses here. You know, it's not going to be cheap, like you said, if you're just swapping out things cosmetically. So,
Exactly. And I want to go into the major systems and structures because I think that this is really important and this is a big thing that people miss. And when you're
yeah.
looking at a home, for at least in Arizona, the roof and the HVAC system are going to be your two biggest expenses as far as replacement goes.
Yep. And I would say the same here in Minnesota and South Dakota. We're looking at, even if it's asphalt shingles versus steel, there's different construction types, but when it comes to cost, it's still not cheap. So if that's something that you need to plan ahead for, or even if shingles are like, older, then a buyer's not going to be able to fully insure them for replacement costs. So there's things to kind of keep that in mind too, where maybe cosmetically they look all right, but you're not going to be able to have full insurance or you have to pay to replace them. So those are things that actually matter from a buyer's perspective. You need to look at those things and take all of that into an account when you're making an offer, because those are things that can't easily be changed and can swing the price or cost of a house, 30, 50, 70 grand, depending on, what you're looking at and the size of the house and the roof pitch and whatever. So,
Yeah, well, and it matters too, that you brought up a good point. Your offer should be dictated on that. So, they always call it, I mean, I hate this term, but everyone calls it lipstick on a pig, right? And so, like, they
yeah.
basically took something that wasn't that great and they just threw some floor and some countertops and some paint and they made it look beautiful. But if the roof is still bad, there's structural issues, there you have an old HVAC system, those are huge ticket items. I mean, HVAC in Arizona can run you $10,000 to $15,000, and a roof, I mean, to your point, depending on the roof, can be anywhere between $10,000 and probably $25,000. So you have to really understand that that's a big thing. And my buyers always discount that. They're always like, I'm like, oh, this place has a new roof. Okay. Well, it's not like just okay. Like there's a brand new roof on it. Like that's huge. Like, that is something big. Where somebody tells me the counters are done and it's painted, I'm kind of like, okay, well, we could get that done for like $5,000, or $10,000, depending on the size of the, so it's really like, that doesn't move the needle for me in the same way because, these big systems are where people have trouble and where people run into problems. And there's other things too. I mean, you want to check the plumbing and, there's other in the sewer scope and make sure that's clear. And there's a bunch of things, but these big systems are what's going to cost you. And the problem with the big systems too is they always hit and you don't know, right? Like your AC breaks and they're like, it's done. You need a new one. You're like, oh, or
and
your
it's 90
roof.
degrees in the middle of summer and you can't afford to wait.
Yeah. There's a big rainstorm and your roof's leaking, and that will cause damage, right? With your, so it's never simple where it's like, if you want new countertops, I mean, you don't have to do it right away. Save for a year and then put in some new you don't have to just change it all right away if you can't afford to do that. So like if you're moving into a house and it needs a roof or it needs, countertops and paint and they cost the same amount of money, at least on the countertops and paint, you have time to plan for that and you don't have to do it all at once, where the roof is just gonna go. And when it goes, you gotta pay to fix it or you gotta pay to replace it. So, those are big things that people they overlook, because they get really distracted, and realtors get distracted too. That's, you and I are investors. We own property. We know, like we've had roofs go out. We have had HVAC systems have to get replaced. Some realtors, if they don't own any real estate, like they've never had that either. Or maybe, they live in a brand new home. So, they don't have that problem where, a lot of these flips are older homes.
Yeah. And so those issues don't come to mind, or, some agents might forget to mention them or not really be thinking about that from a replacement standpoint. And, in our area, it's kind of interesting, but there are still homes around here that do not have central air. It's window AC or, wall AC. And so it's like, okay, everything looks beautiful, but it doesn't have central air. And then, buyers nonchalantly, well, we can add that, no problem. I'm like, where's your unit going to go? Where's your ductwork going to go? You're going to lose headspace if the ductwork is overhead, and how much is that actually going to cost you? Because you're not just buying the outdoor condenser. You got to do all of the retrofitting on the inside too. Yep. So it just goes back to things that you can change versus things you can't.
Exactly. And another thing that buyers aren't looking at is affordability. So I will tell you that my buyers, some of them are overly concerned about affordability. Like I was saying, moving outside of town to then probably pay more money in gas to commute all over the place in town. And, so some people are they're looking at it the wrong way. But then, yes, other people, they have no idea how much their payment's going to be. And I think that I think that if you don't know what your payment's going to be, I think part of that problem is you don't have a good loan officer, because I think your loan officer should be breaking this all down for you as part of your
Yeah.
pre-qualification. Like, hey, are you comfortable with this payment, with tax and insurance, etc.? But I see a lot of people with loan officers that they they have no idea what their payment even is on the houses that they're looking at.
Yeah, and I think it's important because it's like you can still be comfortable with a monthly payment amount and have like reservations about the value of the house. That's fine, but at least you know you're comfortable with what that amount would be. Where, in the past we've had, some lenders that'll just be like, "Yep, you're qualified up to 400,000." But that buyer would never ever be comfortable with a payment that high. So sometimes it's, not trying to sell somebody on a payment per se, but asking them what they're comfortable with, and you can't change that after the fact. Once you sign on the dotted line and then decide, "Hey, this is like 500 bucks too much a month." It's too late. It's too late. It's hard to pivot after you've proceeded with everything. So,
And I've seen deals fall out because of this. I've had two in the last 2 years where basically, and this is why I started working with another loan officer, is because I'm like, how are they not knowing the payments going into the deal? But basically what happens
mhm,
is they start to work through the loan. Interest rates have been all over. So that's part of it, where when they talk to the loan officer, maybe interest rates were half a point different, and then they went up, because remember, they were kind of going like this they still
yep,
kind of are. And so they are like, wait, I was on my edge, and now it's, $300 more, and I just can't afford it. Or they didn't calculate in the right HOA amount, or, or they get their insurance policy and they didn't realize it was going to be that expensive. And so all these
yeah.
things can happen, but you don't want to be in that position, because that's, you want to really understand your numbers, and you don't want to feel like you're pushing it. You want to be comfortable in your payment, because I will tell you, owning a house, things break and there's expense to it. So you don't want to cap yourself, like where your tub is just about overflowing, because you're going to need more money monthly.
Exactly. I know. I totally agree. And, one of the last of our top 5 things that actually matter is future value. And Danielle and I were both investors, so we tend to think like this anyways. But even if it's your first home, you need to think like an investor. And what I mean by that is you need to be thinking about, okay, what is the resale potential on a home like this or this location? Am I in a good neighborhood or in a good community? If I had to change something or whatever, what would be the potential rental income on this property if I needed to do that or take that route for whatever reason? So, thinking like an investor, even if it's your first home, have some of those conversations with your realtor. I think it's very important to be mindful of that because it's, again, just better to be proactive than reactive if something does need to change in the future.
Yeah, and I have a lot of these conversations with my late 20 and then 30 some year olds, like where they're maybe they're single or they're married and they don't have kids yet, and the home they're buying, this is not their forever home. So I always chat with them about, if you want to use this as a rental property, you have to keep these things in mind, like the layout, the area, like, is this a good rental area? I know with condos, like, first floors rent easier than second floors because older people don't like steps, or, so and even, some HOAs don't even allow rentals, so you don't want to buy in there, because
Yep.
then you're going to be forced to sell. And the problem with it is, if you're forced to sell, you can't plan life either, right? You decide to get married or you have a baby, you're in a 2-bedroom condo, you're like, we want a yard, we want this. Well, you have to sell wherever the market is. And maybe the market's down and you're going to lose money, but you can't put a renter in because the HOA policy says no rentals allowed. So that's terrible. You don't want that
Yeah.
situation. So, you want a situation where, whether or not you want to be a landlord, you have the ability to be a landlord. And then, whether that's because you want to be one, or maybe there's a temporary situation where you're not going to be in town for a year, or maybe, you're getting married, but you want to keep this place as income on the side. Whatever it is, you don't want to be restricted. And you want to make sure
Yeah.
it's a place somebody would want to rent. And so it's just very important. I always tell people, like, they'll be like, well, I don't want to be a landlord. And I'm like, well, I didn't think I was going to be a landlord at 28 either, but now I have rentals. So, like, like, life just
Yep.
kind of happens, and you really need to plan, like, you might be, because you might want to. You might want to keep it. Like, you might say, oh my God, I can make all this rental income. Like, why wouldn't I just keep it?
Yep. Yep. And for those that say I don't want to be a landlord, it's still something to keep in mind with your investor hat on because you can hire property managers.
Mhm.
Obviously that's a whole process too, but if you don't want to handle the day to day, but let's say the market's down or, all of the reasons you just talked about, hire a property manager then.
Mhm.
There's options and opportunities out there. So you don't have to go backwards just because you don't want to deal with something. So something to
Exactly.
keep in mind anyways.
It's totally something to keep in mind. So let's talk about things that don't matter. It's so funny because these things are buyers, what they focus on when you walk in, but they really don't matter that much. And one of them is
Yeah.
the paint colors and the cosmetics, like we've already talked about. Like, this is not
Yeah.
expensive.
No. No, but I've seen like, "Oh my god, I'm gonna have to paint every single room," and
Mhm.
it's like, "Okay, if it's just paint and you hate painting, then hire somebody." It's call it a couple thousand bucks depending on the size of the house,
It's
maybe up to
cheap.
5 to
Yeah, it's cheap.
it's cheap in the grand scheme of things. It's easy, so easy to change. It's like, are we really talking about this purple bedroom that was, a kid? Like, really?
Well, at the end
You
of the
know?
day, like, you and I are investors, so we have all these cheap contractors. I mean, I always tell people that's part of what you get with me, like, my contractor list. Like, I have tons of people that are affordable. You don't need to call, like, a corporate paint company that's gonna charge you $15,000 to paint the inside of the house. I have guys that'll probably do it for 4 grand. Like, so these aren't
Yep.
that's the whole house. These aren't, like, big issues, and I was showing a buyer around yesterday, and we see this house, and, like, it's so great, and I see the potential, and she just does not. But I will tell you, the floors, they were living there. There's a single man.
Yep.
I can already tell. I saw him going out the door, and I'm guaranteed he's not married. But the floors were so dusty that I wasn't sure if they were damaged or dusty. So I took a paper towel and kind of like wiped them. And I'm like, oh, they're nice under there, you know? But the
Yep.
walls were painted white and dark green. And the bedroom curtains and all the kids' rooms were those heavy blackout curtains, so it made the whole place look so dark,
Dark.
okay? But to
Yes.
me, I'm like, you clean up the floor, you paint the walls white, you get rid of the curtains and brings all this light into the house. We're in Arizona, we have so much sunshine.
Yeah.
Like, this is an
Yes.
amazing house. But all my buyer could see is like it's dirty and it's dingy and it's dark and the walls green and they just can't
Yeah.
look past it. But you're like, if you just could, this house would be beautiful. Like, if this house had, you know, $15,000 worth of work, it would be beautiful. But they maybe
Yeah.
$20,000 worth of work. But it's also cheap, so you could pay, get a discount, negotiate it down, probably get, 10 grand off the purchase price, and it's already priced low. And it's amazing. And good school district, good area, nice yard, great layout, all the things that we talked
Yeah.
about that you can't change.
No. So, question on that. If you could redo that house or whatever, do what you were talking about for about 20 grand, if the buyer did that and you said, you could negotiate the purchase price down, how much more would it be worth if, she's would be building equity your buyer?
Oh,
Like, let's say you spent
100%.
20 grand, but it'd be worth 40 or 50 grand more. It's like, this is a gem. These are rare finds.
Totally rare finds. Exactly. And I'm like looking at it like, oh my God. And I did text the listing agent. I go, because I knew she wasn't going to buy it. I said, do you want some feedback? She's like, yeah. I'm like, he needs a cleaner or him or someone needs to go through there with a mop and get rid of the curtains. Like, you can't do anything about the paint. Like, I mean, you could, but he's
Yeah.
not going to paint most likely. But
Yeah.
bring some light in there and clean the dust off the floor. And she's like, thank you so much. But it's
Yeah.
true. She just didn't know.
And you're
Sometimes you
like,
don't
sure,
know.
no problem.
Yeah, yeah, right. Well, I'm sure, when he showed it to her, like, it was a little cleaner, but it's been sitting on the market a couple months and he's just living life
Yeah.
and his kids are there
Yeah.
and everyone has their, curtains closed or whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's part of the presentation. But this actually is good advice for sellers too, because if you take it the other
Yeah.
direction, I think sellers they don't see certain things in their house. Like, they don't stage their house at all, for a showing. They're like, oh yeah, come
Yeah.
over, whatever, whatever. It's like, no, like, you need to stage the house a little bit. Like, you need to bring the
Yeah.
light in. You need to make sure it's clean. Like, some of my houses
Yep.
that sell the fastest, I have sellers that like go that extra mile. Like, they're like, they basically looks like you're walking into an Airbnb. They have little setups on every bed. But that stuff does matter. That stuff does sell homes because people are so visual.
People are extremely visual, and that's why even backing it up and this is a whole nother topic, but even listing photos or things online, because people need to look and see the house and like it before they even set foot in the door. So it's
Yeah.
like, okay, all of
Yeah.
that stuff just kind of rolls down and makes a big difference at the end of the day. But
It is. And
yeah.
so let's move to the next one, which is outdated kitchens and bathrooms.
Yes. So hardware can be easily upgraded, even if it's like, the shiny gold cabinets, which although gold's like coming
I
back,
was gonna
but
say that's coming back in, but yes, I know what you're saying.
yeah, but
Not the tarnished look, like the very crisp, clean gold is coming
yes,
back in.
exactly. But it's like a lot of those things don't cost a lot of money, but they're high impact items. So everybody, the kitchen's the gathering place of the home. So replacing a couple light fixtures in the kitchen or the cabinet pulls, or even like lighting itself. Maybe it's switching the bulbs that you have. Those things make a difference. But to me, like outdated kitchens and bathrooms, unless it's like a really huge kitchen that is going to add up, more than normal. If the house is priced right, it's easy to change those things. You can't change, the functionality or the layout, but you can change cupboards or
Yep.
countertops or whatever, XYZ.
As
So,
long as you're not removing walls. And a lot of times with cabinets, they don't even need replaced. They just need painted. I know that painting cabinets isn't always great, but painting a cabinet,
yeah,
what do you think flips do? Do you think they're really swapping out cabinets? No, they're painting them.
yeah,
That's what they're doing.
yeah,
So if you can
yep.
do that, it's not that expensive to do that.
No,
So the next one is staging and furniture. So this drives me nuts when I walk into a place that's for sale and the furniture is like so old and dated and all over the place because it's great for a buyer because if they can see past the furniture, it makes the
yeah,
home look dated, but sometimes the home's not even dated. It's just the furniture is dated.
yeah.
And I'm trying to get just like, this is not your furniture. You're not buying it furnished.
Nope.
Imagine taking the furniture out and what this would look like.
And I think it's important because although it doesn't matter as much, buyers can't see past that. I walked into a house once. The house was really nice. They had a cat. This cat had totally tore up this like faux leather couch. So it had like claw marks and scratches in it. It immediately took that house from like an 8.5 to a 6.5 because it just looked dingy and dirty. And that's just the furniture. It's like that couch is going out the door and probably into a dumpster. Look at the things that are here, the shingles being new, the HVAC being updated. Like that couch is cosmetic and the hair on the floor, like, yeah, it's kind of gross because there was a lot of it. But that's cosmetic too. Like that'll get taken care of. It wasn't like beat up with animals where it was like, the subfloor was stained or anything like that. It was purely cosmetic in this case. And it's like, okay, we can work with this. This is not a problem.
Yeah, and that's the thing is people, I think they look at it as like how the home was taken care of. I think they assess that. But the truth is that on a home, if somebody didn't take care of it, it would show up more in like an old and leaking roof
Yeah.
or like plumbing issues than hair everywhere because hair everywhere or a smoker, like all of that can be fixed. And I think people say like, oh, they have this couch and this hair. This house is nasty. Like, like they're
Yeah,
just like, I don't want to live
exactly.
here. But, the
Yeah.
truth is sometimes you go into homes and an older person lives there a lot of the time and they don't have any money to like repair a roof. So the house looks fine. But then when you start digging in, there's tons of roof leaks, there's potential mold, there's water damage. That's the stuff that you have to be careful of. Hair all over, not a big deal. To me, when I see stuff
Yep.
like hair all over, I'm like, this is why this has been sitting. We can negotiate such a good price because they don't have any buyers. This place smells like an old musty dog. That's
Yes.
great. We can run ozone on here for 24 hours and the smell's gone and we'll get it
Yep.
deep clean, but we can get a good deal here. So those are the
Yeah.
things, like that doesn't scare me. What scares me is a lot of water damage, a lot of leaking things that aren't remediated properly. Like my stepson bought a home that totally got flooded. That doesn't scare me either because it's properly remediated. What scares me is leaks in the wall that people aren't paying attention to, or they don't have the money to fix, or they try to do a DIY, and then you have mold in there. Like that's the stuff that scares me. That's the stuff that I would be afraid to buy. Foundation issues. Like some hair,
Exactly.
some crappy furniture, somebody that's smelly that never cleans their house. That doesn't scare me.
Well, it doesn't. And as a buyer, I've even seen it where it's like, okay, we'll buy your house and we'll give you even what you're asking or close to asking, but we want a professional cleaning company, like, and you
Mhm.
give them the name and you give them like a minimum number of hours. Like, we want you to pay that, to hire them for XYZ, and here's what we want done. We expect it to be, clean when we move in. Okay, great. That seller is usually like, okay, let's do it. Or you negotiate off the purchase price. Either way. But at the end of the day, you can walk away with a good property at it's like,
I
how
love
easy
it.
is that? Look
I
past the stuff.
I just bought this property, I'm in the middle of closing and they have 4
Yes.
kids. So like I walk in and I mean, there's just crap broken. It's like 4 kids, there's just
Yeah.
little things broken everywhere. There's toys everywhere. The roof had this rope hanging from it where I don't know, one of the kids tied it to something and was like trying to climb it. There's a big one of those trampolines in the backyard that's like broken. Like, but to me, I'm like, this is all. I mean, you just clean
Yeah.
that up and you're good to go. I don't think, but I think a lot of people thought, oh, there's all this damage with this home. It's all so minor. It's all minor handyman. It's less than $1,000 worth of handyman work, and I'm getting
Yeah.
this killer deal on this house. So it's like, you got to try to look past that. Cause when you walk into these I guess what we're trying to say, if you walk into these perfect homes, one, there could be underlying issues. But two,
Mhm.
you're going to pay for that perfect home. Like
Yep.
maybe you could have paid 400 grand, but now this perfect home's 480 grand. Well, you could have taken an imperfect home, put 20 grand into it, and got the same result.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. And I think that, yes, it might be a little bit of an extra step of work or, picking out where it's like, yeah, turnkey is great in certain instances. But if you're trying to be financially savvy, not cheap, but just financially wise and savvy, then those are the things that you need to, look at the things that we told you that are important and keep in mind of those items that don't matter.
Or if you're trying to stay within a budget too. Because, I deal with some people, they just have money. They just want it turnkey. They just want it. And that's fine. Like, I get that too. Like, not
Yeah.
everyone is looking at their home some people just have money to do it. And they're like, you know what? I want this perfect thing. I want to move in. It's not a big deal. I'm not going to sacrifice location or anything because I can afford my perfect home in my perfect location. And then, you know what? You should do that. But if you're at all like trying to, build equity, or if you're somebody that's like, I want to have to now live outside of where I want to live to get this perfect home versus buying this other home in a location that I want or a layout that I want, but then it needs work, don't
Yeah.
be afraid of that work. You got to find out what that work is, but don't be afraid of that work. Like if the work is there's mold, there's a leaky roof, there's, tree lines in the sewer system, there's foundation issues, those can turn into really big problems. So like you got to
Yeah.
really think those through. But if it's like, yeah, it's in good shape, but I got to do the carpet, I'm going to have to put in floors, I'm going to have to paint, I'm going to, that stuff is seriously, you guys, it's so, so, so cheap and easy. And
Yeah.
you should get what you want. You should get something like that you're going to slowly improve over time in the location that you want versus this beautiful home in a location you don't want, because you don't want to be unhappy in 3 years and wanting to move.
Completely agree. And so I think, to sum it all up, like think of the big things first as being more important. Location, roof, HVAC, the big things that you cannot change, functionality, layout. And then you can talk about some of the things like the paint or carpet, but you have to look at the big things first. Those are the most important and those are the most overlooked.
Yep. And we have a buyer and seller guide below. So please click on our link in our YouTube description, or if you're on Instagram, up by our profile page.